Somewhere along your incredible journey of awakening, perhaps right after a mind-blowing spiritual insight or a moment that shattered your old reality, you felt it, a profound shift. It was like the curtains were pulled back and suddenly you saw the illusions, the repetitive patterns, the constant deafening noise of the everyday world for what they truly were. And then, in the aftermath, a silence descended. At first, this newfound quiet felt incredibly powerful, almost like a superpower, a deep sense of liberation. But then, almost imperceptibly, something began to change. That vibrant sense of meaning, the very juice of life, started to evaporate. It wasn't a dramatic overnight implosion, no. It was far more subtle, a quiet fading, as if your soul gently turned down the volume on life and then, crucially, forgot to turn it back up. You found yourself stopping the chase, that relentless pursuit of something. You stopped caring with the same intensity, not in a reckless, self-destructive way, but with a kind of quiet, existential sigh. And in that stillness, the questions started to whisper, growing louder and more insistent. Now that I finally glimpsed the truth, why do I feel so incredibly numb, so devoid of my old fire? If this resonates, if you're nodding along wondering if you're the only one who traded worldly anxiety for a baffling spiritual void, then you absolutely need to understand what's really going on. Because what if this bewildering emptiness isn't a dead end, but the very doorway to a life more authentic and deeply fulfilling than you ever dared to imagine, a secret upgrade hidden in plain sight? There's a peculiar twist to this journey, a paradox that can leave even the most dedicated seekers feeling bewildered. We're often told, and perhaps we expect, that spiritual awakening will ignite our passions, set our souls ablaze with purpose, and fill us with boundless energy. Yet, for so many, especially those of us who are deeply introspective, the natural empaths, the relentless seekers of truth, the experience can be starkly, surprisingly, the opposite. Instead of filling us up, it can feel like it completely empties us out. I vividly remember a conversation with a dear friend, incredibly bright, spiritually attuned, someone who had devoured all the right books, from Eckhart Tolle and Alan Watts to Krishnamurti. She then experienced a massive awakening, a profound breakthrough that followed an intense dark night of the soul. She finally got it, she told me. She saw through the illusion of her conditioned identity, the futility of the ego's endless chasing of external success and validation. And yet, just 2 months later, I found her staring blankly at her ceiling, struggling to summon the will to even get out of bed. Her words still echo with me. I used to cry over not achieving enough, over not being more. Now I genuinely don't care whether I do anything at all. I thought awakening would light me up, make me feel alive, not leave me feeling like a ghost in my own life. This perplexing post-awakening fog isn't some new age phenomenon. It's a profound psychological process hinted at by some of the greatest minds, long before spiritual awakenings became a trending topic. Carl Jung, the pioneering father of analytical psychology, touched upon this very state decades ago. He didn't use the trendy spiritual jargon we hear today, but he possessed an uncanny understanding of what happens to the human psyche when the vast, hidden realms of the unconscious begin to flood into conscious awareness. Jung famously said, "Enlightenment doesn't come by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." It's a beautiful, potent quote until you truly sit with the lived reality of what making the darkness conscious actually entails. Awakening, in this Jungian sense, isn't the finish line. It's the dramatic, often unsettling beginning of a profound psychological death. It's the death of who you thought you were, the dismantling of the carefully constructed identity that gave your life shape and meaning. All those familiar structures, your career ambitions, your life goals, the dynamics of your relationships, even your very sense of linear time and personal history can begin to crumble and collapse. But here's the crucial catch that Jung would emphasize. Your ego, that sense of I, isn't obliterated. It's still there, but it's utterly confused, like a seasoned captain who has suddenly lost all her maps, charts, and navigational tools in the middle of an unknown ocean. And without a new, reliable map, the old forms of motivation simply evaporate, leaving you adrift. So, if you're in this space, it's vital to understand that what you're experiencing is likely not clinical depression or a simple case of lost motivation in the conventional sense. You've journeyed into a profound limbo state. You've woken up from something, the dream of your old, conditioned self, but you haven't yet fully woken up into something new. This is where things get truly fascinating and, unfortunately, deeply misunderstood in our fast-paced, productivity-obsessed modern world. This feeling of numb detachment, this apparent lack of drive, isn't a sign of failure or a psychological disorder. It's something ancient, something sacred. Jung himself warned that our contemporary culture actively avoids this phase at all costs. This sacred pause, this fertile void, this profound in-between state. He believed this period of emptiness and unknowing was absolutely essential for true individuation, the lifelong, courageous process of becoming your most authentic, whole, and integrated self. But let's be honest, nobody really prepares you for this part of the journey, do they? The spiritual buffet often highlights the bliss and the breakthroughs, but skims over the necessary descent into the quiet, disorienting void. And that's precisely what we need to unravel. What is really happening in the depths of your psyche after that initial awakening? And how could this very loss of old motivation be the threshold to the biggest, most significant spiritual upgrade you've ever experienced, if you learn to understand and navigate it correctly? If you've been floating in that post-awakening fog, staring at your old vision board with a sense of utter detachment, wondering where your once familiar spark and drive have disappeared to, please know this: you are not crazy. You are not broken. You are undergoing a psychological and spiritual metamorphosis so deep and fundamental that most people simply don't have the language to describe it. This isn't just a minor tweak to your thinking patterns or a new set of beliefs. It's more like your entire inner operating system is being reprogrammed from the ground up. All those goals you used to chase with such fervor, the meticulously crafted to-do lists, the ambitious 5-year plans, the hustle culture anthems that once got your blood pumping, they just don't move you anymore. And this isn't because you're suddenly failing or becoming lazy. It's because the very system of motivation that fueled those pursuits is itself collapsing, making way for something far more profound. Carl Jung saw this coming, this internal re-architecture, long before it became a whispered concern in online spiritual communities. For most of your life, your motivation likely sprang from your ego identity, that carefully constructed me you presented to the world and believed yourself to be. You wanted to prove yourself, to be seen, to achieve success, to be loved and accepted. These aren't inherently bad things, they're a natural part of human development. Jung referred to this public-facing self as the persona, the mask we wear to navigate and function within society. The awakening process, however, is like a powerful solvent that begins to dissolve this persona, stripping away the mask layer by layer. Suddenly, you're less concerned with being liked, less invested in winning the conventional games of life, primarily because you've started to see the game itself with startling clarity. Its rules, its illusions, its often empty prizes. And this is precisely where things can feel incredibly weird and disorienting. Without the familiar mask, your old goals, ambitions, and desires often don't fit anymore. They were tailored to a version of you that, in a very real sense, no longer exists or is rapidly fading. So now you might feel like an actor in a play who has suddenly stepped off stage, wandered into an entirely different production, and can't for the life of them remember their lines or even what character they are supposed to be playing. This is a core reason why you feel so unmotivated by the old standards. You haven't truly lost your drive. Rather, you've outgrown the specific type of fuel that used to power it. Carl Jung believed that our ultimate purpose isn't to endlessly serve the ego's demands, but to integrate it, to bring it into harmonious alignment with something much larger, much deeper, what he termed the self. This self isn't the small, constricted I that craves praise and fears criticism. It's the transcendent, soul-level center within you, that timeless core that connects you to the entirety of existence. And this self, this true essence, simply doesn't operate on the currency of status, external approval, or even the ego's desperate need for constant clarity and control. It is here to express its inherent truth, to unfold its unique potential. Once that initial awakening cracks open the door, your psyche embarks on a profound recalibration. It begins, almost instinctively, to reject anything that feels fake, forced, inauthentic, or purely ego-based. This internal audit can extend to your job, your relationships, long-held ambitions, and even that carefully crafted dream board from a few years ago that now seems to belong to a stranger. This is why so many people describe the awakening process as simultaneously liberating and profoundly disorienting. However, Jung issued a crucial warning. If we stop here, if we get stuck in this initial phase of disillusionment without understanding its purpose, we can fall into significant traps. Some people awaken to the illusory nature of their old life and then fall into a pattern of spiritual bypassing, convincing themselves that absolutely nothing matters, that it's all just an illusion, and therefore the most enlightened response is to disconnect, float, and numb out. They confuse healthy detachment with a disengaged apathy. But the self, that deeper intelligence within, desires something entirely different. It doesn't want to escape the world. It wants to live through you more fully, to bring its wisdom and light into this human experience, into this body, into this world. It doesn't reject the world. It seeks to redefine your role within it, from a place of authenticity and soul-aligned purpose. To step into that new role, however, you almost invariably have to navigate a strange, often uncomfortable middle phase, a phase Jung described with brilliant insight, yet one that few people recognize or honor while they're in it. This is the phase after the initial aha moment that almost no one talks about openly. It's not glamorous. It doesn't rack up thousands of likes on social media. It doesn't look like meditating serenely on a beach in Bali or crafting profound poetic Instagram quotes. More often, it looks like sitting in silence, feeling a deep sense of unknowing, perhaps unable to even articulate what you're going through, while the rest of the world continues its frantic, busy rush all around you. Carl Jung would gently tell you that in these moments, you're not lost. You are precisely in between. You've disidentified from the old, familiar ego construct, but you haven't yet fully anchored into a new way of living and being that emanates from the self. This transitional space is not a sign of failure, it's a sacred rite of passage. Yet, in our hyper-productive, action-oriented modern world, this profound stillness often gets misdiagnosed as laziness, and this necessary pause gets mistaken for paralysis or depression. Consequently, you might judge yourself harshly for not doing or achieving, and that very judgment can block the subtle energies and guidance your soul is trying to call back to you. Jung had a fascinating term for this psychological dynamic, enantiodromia. It describes the principle that when any one-sided tendency is pushed to its extreme, it inevitably flips into its opposite. When you awaken, your inner pendulum can swing dramatically from the ego-driven, often relentless striving of your past to a profound, soul-level stillness. You might go from an I must do everything, achieve everything, control everything mindset to a bewildered, why bother doing anything at all? And this swing, as unsettling as it can be, is sacred. It's a natural mechanism through which inner balance is ultimately restored. In myths, ancient teachings, and shamanic traditions, this is often symbolized as the hermit phase, the descent into the underworld, the necessary death before a genuine rebirth. It's the precise moment the caterpillar dissolves into an amorphous soup inside the cocoon. No longer a caterpillar, not yet a butterfly, just goo. And let's be frank, goo doesn't get much done. Goo doesn't hustle. Goo doesn't check items off a to-do list. Goo dissolves. This is precisely where the ego panics. It craves action, identity, clear direction, and measurable progress. But the self, that deeper wisdom is whispering, Let go. Be still. I'm building something far deeper, far more resilient here. This is also where much of modern pop spirituality tends to skip the hard, messy, but utterly essential stuff. It often preaches, just follow your joy or high vibes only. And while positive intention and managing your energy are undoubtedly important, Carl Jung would gently but firmly tell you that if you try to bypass the darkness, you invariably skip the gold hidden within it. He believed that shadow integration, the courageous act of facing, acknowledging, and integrating the repressed, uncomfortable, and often disowned parts of yourself, is absolutely essential for becoming whole. It's not optional. It's not extra credit. It's the core curriculum of being a fully embodied human soul. This sacred nothingness, this apparent void you might be feeling, is the fertile ground where the unconscious finally has the space and silence it needs to rise to the surface, bringing its hidden contents into the light of your awareness. You're not failing. You are metabolizing lifetimes of experience, conditioning, and unexpressed potential. Your psyche is incredibly wise. It will at times intentionally stall your old forms of motivation, your familiar drive, even your access to mental clarity on purpose. It does this so you are forced to slow down, to feel, to witness, and ultimately to reclaim the parts of yourself you've buried, denied, or projected onto others. This is the real deep work of transformation. And here's the beautiful, almost magical twist. When you finally stop resisting the void, when you surrender to the stillness and the unknowing, something truly strange and wonderful begins to happen. Motivation, that spark you thought was extinguished, begins to return. But it feels profoundly different this time. It's not the anxious, restless energy of the ego. It's not performative, seeking validation from the outside. It's definitely not the frantic hustle culture that leaves you depleted. It's something older, quieter, and far more authentic. A kind of soul-led movement that feels less like chasing an external goal and more like remembering a deep inner calling. Jung called this the emergence of the self, not as an abstract concept to be understood intellectually, but as a living, breathing, palpable inner compass guiding you from within. So, you've walked through the void. You've sat in the silence, felt the profound stillness, honored the deep pause. And now, something new, something subtle, yet undeniably potent, is beginning to stir within you. It's likely not a dramatic lightning bolt of revelation, nor a sudden explosion of fireworks. It's more akin to a quiet, gentle inner pull, a nudge not to frantically scramble back to your old life and its familiar comforts, but to begin patiently, consciously, building a new one that is truly aligned with who you are now becoming. This is the realm where the self begins to speak, not always in clear, booming words, but often in subtle nudges, in feelings of resonance or dissonance, in what Carl Jung beautifully termed the symbolic life. He believed that once the ego has learned to surrender its tight grip and the contents of the unconscious have been compassionately integrated, we become capable of living from a place far deeper and more authentic than mere personality. That's the pivotal moment when life stops being primarily about survival, achievement, and accumulation, and organically transforms into a journey of profound meaning, purpose, and genuine contribution. And here's an often unexpected fact. When the self begins to lead your life, it's often beautifully, refreshingly ordinary. You don't always need to hustle. Instead, you learn to respond to the invitations and opportunities that life presents. You're no longer primarily motivated by a fear of missing out, FOMO. Instead, you're guided by what feels deeply aligned, resonant, and true for you. You gradually stop chasing external clarity with frantic effort, and instead you learn to recognize it with inner certainty when it naturally arrives. Living from the self doesn't mean you'll suddenly feel blissfully motivated in the traditional high-energy sense every single day. You're still human. You might still experience waves of fatigue, moments of confusion, or even periods of grief as old layers continue to shed. That's all part of the rich tapestry of being human. But what you likely won't feel, or will feel with much less intensity, is that constant gnawing sense of inner betrayal, that draining feeling of dragging yourself through a life that fundamentally doesn't fit, like wearing clothes that are 3 sizes too small. Instead, you might start to notice subtle yet significant shifts. You find yourself genuinely drawn to create, even when no one is watching or validating your efforts. You begin to say no with greater ease to things that don't truly resonate, even if they look impressive or sensible on paper. You start following the breadcrumbs of your authentic curiosity rather than blindly adhering to a pre-programmed checklist of shoulds. You increasingly choose inner peace over external performance. This is the new fuel. It's not adrenaline, it's alignment. Jung called this living symbolically, not in a world of pure fantasy, but living with soul, where you begin to trust your inner imagery, your dreams, the strange synchronicities that appear in your life, and those undeniable gut feelings, treating them all as valid and valuable forms of guidance. So what does this look like in the nitty-gritty of real life? Sometimes it's as simple as starting to ask yourself different, more soul-centered questions. Instead of, what should I do? You might ask, what is quietly, persistently calling to me? Instead of, what's the grand plan? You might inquire, where is life gently nudging me right now? Instead of, how can I prove myself or impress others? You might explore, what feels most honest and true for me to express or embody in this moment? You begin to participate with life rather than constantly trying to dominate or control it. And this profound shift doesn't mean giving up on ambition entirely. It means fundamentally transforming its nature. Ambition, when filtered through the self, transmutes into a deep devotion, a devotion to truth, to presence, to authentic growth, and to serving something larger than your individual ego. And the beautiful irony is that this kind of soul-aligned energy often accomplishes things far more effectively and with much less inner friction than the ego's frantic striving ever could. But now it's sustainable. Now it's genuinely soul-powered. This is the self's intrinsic motivation, not to impress, but to express, not to acquire, but to contribute. And it often leads you, quite naturally, to create, to serve, to heal, to teach, and to build in ways that are uniquely yours, not because you feel you should, but because your whole being resonates with a deep, unequivocal yes. So if you've been feeling like your spark has gone out after your awakening, please consider this. Perhaps it was only the old ego-driven fire that burned down, and perhaps it needed to make space for you to discover a much deeper, more resilient flame, one that doesn't flicker and die when the external winds of circumstance blow. Carl Jung never promised an easy path to wholeness, and if you're here deeply considering these ideas, you're already courageously walking that path. It's not about desperately trying to get back your old motivation. It's about bravely discovering a new one rooted in wholeness, authenticity, and soul, not in performance, obligation, or fear. This isn't the end of your awakening journey. It's the true, profound beginning of your becoming. As you navigate this new terrain, free from the clamor of the ego's relentless demands, you'll begin to notice that the motivation arising from the self speaks in a profoundly different dialect. It doesn't shout, it doesn't coerce, and it certainly doesn't rely on fear or the promise of external accolades. Instead, it whispers, it nudges, it communicates through a subtle sense of rightness, a feeling of deep, quiet resonance that settles in your bones when you're aligned, or a corresponding, equally subtle sense of offness or internal friction when you're straying from your authentic path. Learning to discern and trust these almost imperceptible cues is perhaps one of the most vital skills you'll cultivate in this new chapter of your life. It requires a willingness to listen deeply, to create pockets of inner quiet amidst the ongoing noise of the world, so these delicate signals aren't drowned out. You might find yourself inexplicably drawn to a new creative pursuit you'd never considered, or a particular book might practically leap off the shelf at you, holding a piece of wisdom you didn't even know you were seeking. Conversely, activities or even relationships that once felt acceptable or even desirable might now evoke a distinct feeling of energetic drain or a subtle, internal no. These are not arbitrary whims. They are the sophisticated communications of your inner guidance system, your soul gently steering you towards experiences, people, and expressions that will nourish your growth and allow your unique essence to flourish. This isn't about seeking dramatic signs from the heavens, but about attuning to the quiet, consistent wisdom that has always been there, waiting for you to finally turn down the volume on everything else and truly listen. One of the most liberating and perhaps initially challenging aspects of this self-led existence is the realization that consistent, high-octane motivation, as defined by our productivity-driven culture, is not the natural state of a soul-aligned life. The ego operates on a linear, often frantic timeline, demanding constant progress and measurable output. The self, however, moves in harmony with more organic, cyclical rhythms, much like the natural world itself. There will be seasons of intense creativity, inspired action, and outward expansion, where you feel a powerful current carrying you forward. And equally, there will be essential seasons of quiet integration, deep rest, reflection, and what might appear to the external world as doing nothing. This is not a sign of regression or a loss of your newfound connection. It's an integral part of the process. Just as a farmer knows there is a time for planting and a time for letting the fields lie fallow to regenerate, your soul understands the necessity of these fallow periods for assimilating experiences, healing old wounds, and gathering energy for the next wave of growth and expression. Learning to honor these inner rhythms, to grant yourself permission to simply be without the incessant pressure to do, is a radical act of self-love and profound wisdom in a world that often equates stillness with stagnation. This embracing of ebb and flow allows for a sustainable, deeply nourishing way of living, one that respects your human limitations while simultaneously opening you to the boundless energy of your true nature. As the authentic self increasingly takes the helm, you may find that your choices, your priorities, and even your way of engaging with the world begin to diverge, sometimes significantly, from the established norms and expectations of those around you, and indeed from the patterns of your own past. This journey into genuine authenticity, while deeply rewarding, often requires a quiet yet profound courage. Friends, family, or colleagues accustomed to the old you might not understand the shifts they witness. They might question your new direction, your seemingly diminished ambition for conventional success, or your newfound need for solitude and introspection. There can be a subtle or not so subtle pressure to conform, to slip back into more familiar and predictable roles. It takes considerable inner strength and a steadfast commitment to your own inner truth to navigate these external pressures without abandoning your soul's calling. This is where the practice of continually tuning into your inner compass, that unwavering sense of true north provided by the self, becomes paramount. It means learning to validate yourself from within, rather than seeking constant approval or understanding from the outside. It's about choosing the path that feels deeply resonant and integral to your being, even if it means walking a less traveled road, perhaps even one that initially feels a bit lonely. The reward, however, is an unshakable sense of integrity, a profound peace that comes from living in alignment with your deepest values, and the quiet joy of knowing you are finally, truly honoring the unique individual you came here to be. That bewildering numbness, the sense of meaninglessness that often characterizes the post-awakening fog, gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, begins to give way to something entirely different, a quiet, yet deeply felt and profoundly satisfying sense of purpose. This isn't necessarily the kind of grand, world-altering mission the ego might have once fantasized about, though for some, it can certainly evolve into that. More often, this new sense of purpose is discovered in the very fabric of being, in the quality of your presence, in the authentic expression of your unique gifts, however humble or magnificent they may seem, and in the depth and sincerity of your connections with others and with life itself. Purpose shifts from being an external goal to be achieved to an internal state to be embodied. It becomes less about what you do and more about how you are, and how that authentic beingness naturally informs and inspires your actions. You might find profound meaning in a simple act of kindness, in the focused creation of a piece of art, in a moment of deep listening with another human being, or in the quiet contemplation of nature's beauty. These are no longer just random activities. When infused with the presence and alignment of the self, they become potent expressions of your soul's journey. The joy is no longer sought in the outcome, but found in the process itself, in the simple, sacred act of showing up authentically to each moment, allowing your unique light to shine in whatever way feels most true. It's a beautiful and often overlooked truth that as you cultivate this inner wholeness, as you learn to operate more consistently from that centered, self-led space, the transformation doesn't remain confined within you. Like a stone dropped into a still pond, the ripples of your inner state extend outward, naturally and often effortlessly influencing your relationships, your interactions, and the very atmosphere around you. You may notice that you become less reactive to external triggers, capable of responding with more compassion and understanding where you once might have met conflict with defensiveness. Your boundaries, now rooted in self-respect rather than fear, become clearer and are communicated with greater kindness and firmness. You may find yourself becoming a more stable, grounding, and reassuring presence for others, simply by virtue of your own inner equilibrium. The subtle ways your authentic expression, your quiet joy, or your compassionate presence can touch, inspire, or even help heal those around you are often profound, occurring without conscious effort or a specific agenda on your part. The world, in its current state of flux and often bewildering change, desperately needs more individuals who are anchored in their authentic selves, who can bring a measure of peace, clarity, and heart-centered wisdom to their communities and spheres of influence. Your personal journey of awakening and integration, therefore, is not merely a private affair. It is a vital contribution to the collective healing and evolution of humanity. It's crucial to remember, as you journey deeper into this new way of being, that awakening and the integration of the self are not a final destination, a static state of perfection to be achieved and then maintained indefinitely. Rather, it is an ongoing, dynamic process, a lifelong dance of discovery, unfolding, and ever-deepening embodiment. Just when you think you've arrived or figured it all out, life, in its infinite wisdom and creativity, will likely present new layers to explore, new depths of your being to uncover, new challenges that invite you to grow even more fully into the magnificent potential of your soul. The self is not a finite entity. It is a gateway to the infinite, and as such, the journey of knowing it and living from it is boundless. The beauty of this understanding is that it invites you to remain a lifelong learner, to approach each day with a sense of curiosity, openness, and wonder. It encourages you to embrace the mystery, to be patient and compassionate with yourself through all the inevitable twists and turns, and to celebrate the continuous journey of becoming more fully, more authentically, and more joyfully yourself. The path you are on, this sacred pilgrimage back to your own true nature, is an extraordinary adventure. Trust its unfolding, honor its pace, and know that every step, even those that feel uncertain or fallow, is an integral part of the magnificent tapestry of your soul's evolution. This isn't just an awakening from an old dream, it's an awakening to the vibrant, ever-unfolding reality of who you truly are, and the incredible life that awaits when you dare to live it. Even as you become more adept at living from the centered wisdom of yourself, it's important to acknowledge with gentle honesty that the journey isn't always a perfectly smooth ascent into perpetual bliss. The deeply ingrained patterns of your old ego construct, the familiar anxieties, the conditioned doubts, and the subtle pressures of societal expectations can, and often do, resurface like echoes from a fading storm. You might find yourself, even after profound insights and periods of deep peace, momentarily snagged by an old fear of scarcity, a pang of comparison, or a wave of self-criticism. This is not a sign that your awakening was undone, or that you've somehow failed. Rather, it's an indication that there are still deeper layers within your psyche seeking integration and healing. Think of it like this. The initial awakening cleared a significant portion of the overgrown forest, allowing sunlight to reach the forest floor for the first time in a long while. Now, with that new light, you can more clearly see the remaining underbrush, the tangled roots, and the shadowy corners that still require tending. The difference now is that you approach these lingering shadows not from the panicked, identified state of the old ego, but with the compassionate awareness and steady presence of yourself. You can observe these patterns arising without being completely swept away by them. You can meet them with curiosity, asking, what is this old story trying to tell me? What unhealed part of me is seeking acknowledgement and love? This ongoing dance with the shadows, when approached from a place of self-awareness, becomes less of a battle and more of a gentle, courageous process of reclaiming and integrating all parts of your being into a more cohesive and authentic whole. A common misconception that can arise during the post-awakening integration is the idea that living from the self means becoming entirely passive, waiting for divine lightning bolts before taking any action. While the frantic, ego-driven hustle certainly falls away, it's replaced not by inertia, but by a profoundly different quality of action, inspired action. This is movement that arises organically from a place of inner alignment, clarity, and often a quiet sense of joy or compelling interest. It feels less like pushing a boulder uphill and more like flowing with a powerful current. When the self is guiding your actions, there's often a sense of ease, even when the task itself might be challenging. The effort feels purposeful, energized from within, rather than being fueled by anxiety, obligation, or the need to prove something. You might find yourself spontaneously engaging in activities that feel deeply nourishing and aligned, without a long, drawn-out internal debate or a pros and cons list. The rightness of the action is often felt as a clear, internal signal. This doesn't mean every step will be effortless or devoid of obstacles. However, the way you meet those obstacles changes. Instead of being derailed by frustration or self-doubt, you're more likely to approach challenges with creative problem-solving, resilience, and a trust in your ability to navigate whatever arises. The key distinction lies in the source of the impulse. Is it coming from a place of should, must, or fear, or is it arising from a genuine inner resonance, a quiet yes that feels both grounded and expansive? Learning to discern and act upon these self-led impulses is a powerful art that brings grace, efficiency, and a surprising degree of power to your endeavors. As your internal operating system shifts from ego dominance to self-leadership, your entire definition of success and fulfillment undergoes a profound transformation. The old scorecards, so heavily reliant on external achievements, wealth, status, recognition, promotions, the accumulation of possessions, begin to lose their allure, their power to define your worth or happiness. You might look at the societal markers of success and feel a sense of detachment, not because you're above it all, but because your soul is now tuned to a different frequency, seeking a different kind of nourishment. True success, from the perspective of the self, is often measured by internal metrics: the depth of your inner peace, the authenticity of your self-expression, the quality of your relationships, your capacity for compassion, both for yourself and others, the sense of meaning you derive from your daily life, and the feeling of being genuinely aligned with your deepest values. Fulfillment is no longer a distant destination to be reached after a long struggle, but a state of being that can be accessed in the present moment, through conscious presence and heartfelt engagement with life. It might be found in the profound connection during a shared meal with a loved one, the quiet satisfaction of completing a creative project that truly reflects your soul, or the simple joy of witnessing a sunset with an open heart. This shift doesn't necessarily mean abandoning all external goals, but it recontextualizes them. They become expressions of your inner state, rather than desperate attempts to fill an inner void. The pursuit itself, when aligned with the self, becomes inherently fulfilling, regardless of the eventual outcome. The journey of awakening and integration inevitably touches every facet of your life, and relationships are no exception. As you become more anchored in your authentic self, your needs and desires in connection will likely evolve. the superficial interactions, or relationships based on codependency, shared anxieties, or egoic validation may start to feel increasingly unsatisfying, even draining. Instead, you'll find yourself drawn to connections that are rooted in genuine presence, mutual respect, emotional honesty, and a shared resonance at a soul level. You crave authenticity, both in yourself and in others. This might mean that some existing relationships naturally fall away, not necessarily out of conflict, but because the energetic foundation that once sustained them is no longer present. While this can sometimes bring a sense of sadness or loss, it also creates space for new connections to form, relationships that are truly nourishing and supportive of your ongoing growth and unfolding. In your interactions, you'll likely find yourself communicating with greater clarity and compassion, able to express your needs and boundaries more directly, yet kindly. You'll become a better listener, more capable of holding space for others without losing yourself. The desire to fix or change others diminishes, replaced by a deeper acceptance and an appreciation for each individual's unique journey. Cultivating a community, whether large or small, of like-hearted individuals who can mirror your authenticity and support your path becomes increasingly important, creating a sacred web of connection that enriches not only your life, but the lives of those you touch. If there's one thread that weaves its way through every aspect of this post-awakening self-led life, it is the continuous, often challenging, yet ultimately liberating invitation to trust. Trust in the wisdom of yourself, that deep inner knowing that guides you even when your rational mind cannot see the full picture. Trust in the unfolding process of life itself, believing that even the detours, the uncertainties, and the moments of confusion are serving a higher purpose in your evolution. Trust that you are always supported, even when you feel most alone. This is not a blind faith, but a trust born from experience. The accumulated moments where you listened to that quiet inner voice and found it leading you towards greater truth, peace, or alignment. It involves a willingness to surrender the ego's relentless need for control, for guarantees, for a meticulously mapped out future. It asks you to step into the unknown with courage and an open heart, allowing life to surprise you, to teach you, and to reveal its magic in its own perfect timing. There will be times when the path ahead seems shrouded in mist, when your old conditioning screams for certainty. In these moments, the practice is to return to your center, to that quiet place within where the self resides, and to simply breathe, listen, and trust that the next step will be revealed when it needs to be. This ongoing cultivation of trust is perhaps the greatest gift of the awakening journey, for it allows you to navigate the complexities of life not with fear and contraction, but with a sense of adventure, resilience, and a profound, unshakable peace that comes from knowing you are an integral part of something vast, wise, and ultimately benevolent.